大家应该都知道 Ellen Degeneres 吧？但是这一位曾经极受欢迎的主持人，到底是怎么让他的忠实观众一一的离他而去呢？原本提倡仁慈的 Ellen， 在很多的对话当中呈现的却是另外一面。So what happened? 那我们又可以从中学习到什么呢？Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. Now, over a few episodes, we talked about what can we learn from good talk show hosts, about being a good conference call host, about being a good conversationalist. Well, today we want to flip that around and talk about one of the world's most famous talk show hosts and what happened when she stopped being a good conversationalist, which eventually led to the downfall of a massive empire that she had built. Let's get a little bit into what happened to Ellen Degeneres as a host.
那在 Ellen DeGeneres 刚开始主持她的这个 talk show 的时候，还记得 她每次一出来就会跳舞 right? It's about the dancing 然后她会让大家非常开心她那种 atmosphere 但是渐渐的这几年来大家观众就越来越感受到那种好像不太对好像她原本所提倡那种 kindness好像不是真的是这么一回事，尤其是他在跟很多艺人跟很多有名的人的访谈当中，大家渐渐会发现 something is wrong.
And if anyone actually remembers Ellen DeGeneres' early career, she made a lot of her early jumps and steps as a movie star, as a stand-up comedian, on being relatable.
Yeah.
Kind of Jerry Seinfeld style of just talking about everyday life, joking about it in a way that a lot of people could feel like, I understand her, she understands me. So when she came out of the closet and announced officially that she was gay, a lot of people supported that just simply because she felt relatable.
Yeah.
But then as her career progressed, she started to lose that quality. But this is kind of what got her talk show started, which is, again, she came out, she was dancing. She was one of the first people to start taking YouTube and TikTok stars, non-traditional celebrities, and bring them on the show and kind of showcase them. But then eventually they just kind of hit a peak where that relatability, that kindness just disappeared. And a lot of people on YouTube have documented that. Now, we don't want to get into the politics of, was she a good person, etc. But we kind of want to see that transition from being a good conversationalist and looking at the interview skills that we saw in Sean Evans, in Conan O'Brien, Larry King. But then what happened eventually that made her put people in really uncomfortable positions.
What's really interesting, 我们之前所讲到，我们刚刚 Nick 有提到嘛 right? Conan, Larry King, Oprah 这些重量级的这些主持人当然 Larry King 他已经很不幸的离开人世，但是其他的其实他们虽然他们的 career他们现在已经等于说像 Conan O'Brien 他已经没有他现在之前的那个 show 嘛，他已经结束了，但是他结束的时候还是在他最 peak 的时候 right? He didn't end, or Oprah did not end her show because it was bad. It was just a
it
time.
wasn't like, a downfall spiral and they're like, okay, for ratings purposes. Like a lot of them walked away from their show at actually a very peak area where they transitioned. Obviously, the O network is Oprah's worth a lot of money. Even Conan O'Brien, he went into podcasts, he went into other shows. They still have a very strong career ahead of them. Whereas most people are looking at Ellen and going, you're done.
我觉得 Ellen 她现在必须得停她的show，是因为真的她的 rating 非常的低，再加上她有非常多的一些 allegation。但是我们今天刚刚 Nick 有所讲到，我们是就是 focus 在她 interview 人家，她这个访谈的过程当中，她怎么问问题，她问问题的方式是哪边出了一些问题，才会让大家觉得她不是原本的
Ellen。So we just want to talk about a few basic things. Again, what can we learn about being a good conversationalist and what happens when you don't follow these? So the first big one seems very basic, but you start to see it very obviously in conference calls, in interviews, where the person who's running the conversation is leading people and they have no patience to go places that they don't want to go. There's a really great example of this when Ellen is interviewing a Taiwanese, a prodigy ukulele player. And he's 8. He doesn't have great English, so he has a translator. And throughout the entire conversation, when Ellen feels like the conversation is not going at the pace that she wants, she just rudely interrupts both the boy and the translator.
我觉得这真的非常可惜，因为这小男生嘛，在台湾非常的红啊，飞到那个地方，然后受 Ellen 的访问，结果我觉得有的时候可能我们在开会的时候，或者我们在访谈的时候，我们会很希望 go go go， like we want it to have a certain pace， 我们觉得说就快一点嘛，赶快结束，所以有的时候我们会没有一些耐心，我觉得自己我可能也会有这样子的犯这样的错误。So if we don't have the patience, and I think Ellen exhibit that apparently very
blatantly. It wasn't even hidden.
Yeah. 所以他第一个，他做 translator 要做这个翻译的时候呢，他非常没有耐心，他就一直跟这 translator 讲说，你为什么不能够就翻这一句就好了？ I want one sentence.You need to translate that one sentence. 那他在这个部分他受了很大的批评，因为我们都知道语言跟语言之间的翻译不是那么的 black and white， 不是那么的好像 A to B 就是中文英文是一样的方式 right？ 我们有时候需要一些铺陈。 She actually got a lot of criticism for this one from a lot of translators, in fact.
And this goes back to having cultural understanding and cultural empathy, because in the case of this translator, she's trying to give the boy context and then get to the actual question. But Ellen thinks, well, I said 5 words. Why are you saying 20 words? This doesn't make any sense. Like she thinks that the translator is like going around or doing something. But this is what happens when you lose cultural understanding. The other thing that a lot of people can take away with this is in a translation situation, you always need to be patient. You always need to know that the other side's not a direct translation. The translation may have, we've talked about high context versus low context. We've talked about the logic of main point first or details first. Different cultures operate differently. And Ellen shows she has no understanding of that. She just thinks, I said, you translate, done. But the other thing that we can take away from this is just how do we approach translation situations? Even myself, I've taught a ton of workshops in English where we switch between English and Chinese, and say one of my partners, whether it's Sherry or Zona, sometimes I get stuck at that. I will talk for like 10 minutes and then now they have to translate for 10 minutes. But really it should be make one point, allow the translator to translate. Make another point, allow the translator to translate. It should be a pretty like back and forth flow, not I say what I want to say for 10 minutes and then have them translate.
Yeah. 我觉得事先要跟你的翻译官要有建立一个良好的一个关系，还有你们之间的 chemistry。那你们就会稍微讲一下说，我等一下是在大概讲完一句或讲完我一整段再请你翻译，就是你们之间要先讲好。As a translator， 如果你今天要帮老板翻译好了，我觉得有一个很好的方法，如果你老板是希望讲一整段，再留时间给你翻译的话，你就是很直接的，你在刚开始你就可以讲说 to recap or in summary, this is what she said, or this is what he said.
Or I've actually literally had people just tap me on the shoulder and be like, hold on, let me explain first.
Right, yeah.
You have to plan that out.
Yeah.
If you're translating or you're waiting for someone to translate, be patient in that, again, the cultural logic or language logic may be different. So allow for that. But 2 is that is a patience thing.
And then she actually also interrupted the boy when he was answering her question. And that was really unfortunate. 我觉得那一段真的是让我自己觉得看得蛮难受的，因为当那小男孩在解释他的 answer 的时候 Ellen 就觉得it's too much， 然后他就马上打断他。You know, again， 我觉得在我们很 basic 的 conversation 当中，不管你是面对是谁，我觉得都还是要给对方一个空间嘛。Yeah.
Even when like Sherry and I have done live lesson podcasts, etc., there's a lot of patience in allowing someone to get their ideas out, and then we go back and work on things.
Yeah.
And that's true in any situation. So if you're running in a conference call, you know, be mindful of time, but also have the patience. Sometimes people have really great ideas. It just takes a while to assemble what they want to say.
I'm curious to know, though, I'm sure, Nick, you have run into a situation where, you know, we don't have a lot of time. We got like 10 more minutes for your coaching, right? Nick 常常要做这种1个小时的 coaching session. 但是可能对方他真的是有点 struggle. You know, maybe this person really struggled with the language and just could not get the idea out. How do you usually help them to kind of push them, or not push them, but help them, assist them to kind of push forward?
I think sometimes, at least in my experience, what you have to do is know that, especially in a multilingual situation, or where not everyone has their first language is the same, so they have the smoothness of talking, is know how much you can cover. So when I'm in a coaching situation, there's, especially working with startups, there's 100 things we could talk about. We could talk about your pitch presentation. We could talk about your fundraising strategy. We could talk about your business model. You're never going to do that in an hour. So even though someone says, I'd like to talk about all these things, you still need to narrow it down to where you walk away feeling.
Okay.
And then I usually just offer, okay, for these other things, go back, write down your questions, think about what else you want to talk about, and that kind of becomes the agenda for the next section. But this also means that if you're hosting something and you look at your meeting agenda and you're like, wow, we have an hour to cover 20 things, your meeting agenda has a problem.
Right.
And if you know that other people are coming in and they don't have that succinctness, again, your meeting agenda has a problem. You need to think about these things ahead of time.
所以我觉得刚刚 Nick 讲的这个点，我觉得还蛮好的，就是像我本身如果碰到这种状况的话，有的时候呢，你就只有那个1个小时的时间，那你会发现这个人想要 cover 可能是2-3个小时的内容，但是这个时候你可以非常直接，但是也 professional 的跟对方讲说 OK, within today's session, within 1 hour, we can only cover point A and B. 那point C, you know, we can cover that the next time, and maybe you can think about that, and you can get back to me with email or any kind of format that you wanted. So 我觉得 lay out 这个比较实际的一个方法，然后我们就是现在这个阶段就是 tackle 我们可以做到的东西。
Yeah. And so that can be as simple as if you see that the meeting time is running short, you can say, okay, you know, we only have an hour. We've been going for a while. What is one thing that we can talk about and complete so everyone will feel we made it worth our time?
Yeah.
Or you can phrase it in terms of what you want to accomplish. Be like, okay, we only have a few minutes left, but I would really like to have an answer on this.
Right.
So it doesn't sound impatient. It's like, no, don't talk about that. It's being very explicit. This is what we want to cover.
So I think everyone needs to remember, 当我们结束任何一个 meeting 或结束任何 conversation, 其实如果我们有一个 takeaway, just one takeaway, 其实就 right? If you have one big thing or one thing that you got from a meeting, I think you'll probably feel like that was a good meeting. 所以我们真的不用要求 quantity, 其实是个 quality. So I guess the second thing we wanted to talk about, Ellen, I know this is probably a long time ago. She interviewed Mariah Carey. And she had a rumor at a time that she was pregnant. But Ellen kept on prying her and get her to admit that she was pregnant on the show for the rating. And she did it in a way that I thought it was really unfortunate. 她直接就把香槟拿出来，然后就有点是开玩笑方法，就是有点 kind of push her to drink alcohol. But you know, when you're pregnant, you're not supposed to drink alcohol. So that was like her way of getting her to admit. But then Mariah Carey actually ended up having to announce that she had a miscarriage.
So what happens is, again, for a good conversationalist, don't feel like you need to push your agenda. In Ellen's cases, it's probably about ratings. It's probably about being the first to announce.
Yeah.
But her intention overrode kindness, overrode just being a decent person. And in this case, it backfired massively because Mariah Carey at that time was a bit older. There were more complications, there are more risks. So she doesn't want to announce that. And then she gets put in a situation where now she has to announce, oh, that thing that came out on Ellen, it's not okay. So when hosting, when interviewing, be very careful of whether your intention to get, say, sensational news or to get a key piece of information is being overridden by common decency.
Exactly. 我觉得当你非常迫切想要得到你要的东西，就是你的目的很清楚的时候，其实 everyone can tell. Yeah, everyone can feel it. So I know that she's running a show, but still it was really hard to watch.
So one of these is switching it from being very leading, like consultant style, like tell me what's going on, to coaching style. Ask questions that create good stories.
Right.
If you listen back to when we're talking about Sean Evans, Sean Evans asks very detailed questions, but there's still a more coaching style is it allows the answer to interpret something interesting. It's not leading. It's not, I have an intention to get this outcome. And that starts to create these awkward moments when the intention is so clear.
Or I think we can learn a little from Oprah as well. Now, 大家都知道 Oprah 她 interview 非常多的有名的人。那她的 interview style 我们上次有提到，她是非常 open， 非常有 compassionate， 非常有 it has a lot of heart。当她这种主持的方式的时候，他不用特别去挖人家的一些新闻，其实人家会自然而然的就会打开他的心声就讲。I mean, actually, Ellen admitted that when she came out of her closet on Oprah's show.
It's one of those things where maybe Oprah had an intention, but it wasn't obvious.
Yeah.
Whereas when Ellen's trying to work with Mariah Carey, it's obvious.
Yeah, it is.
And it's very intentional. The last thing that we want to cover is pretty tied to the second thing we covered, which is if you're going to have a conversation and maybe you do have an intention, you need to remember what you talked about before.
Yeah.
So there's an interview segment where Ellen is talking to Dakota Johnson, and she's interviewed Dakota Johnson before. She's talked about certain things, and then she starts, again, maybe it's for ratings, maybe it's just to create some kind of controversy. She starts pushing Dakota Johnson on something that she was very wrong about.
在我们在看的时候还蛮what happened? So what happened was, 我觉得 Ellen 她这个时候，有的时候她跟一些艺人在一些访谈，她没有去想说我到底上次跟她讲什么，上次的 context 是什么，因为她想 carry on 这个 conversation， 她想要制作这个节目，想要把这个节目做得比较有意思，所以她就会特别去问一些问题。But she forgot what she said before. 所以在这个访谈当中，他就在问说Dakota Johnson 刚过了30岁生日嘛，你有个 party， 那我为什么没有被你邀请过去呢？ How come I wasn't not invited?
Yeah, and Dakota Johnson immediately went, you were invited because last year when you interviewed me and I brought up my birthday party, you gave me the same crap.
Exactly.
So I made very specifically sure you were invited.
Now Ellen, she looks so like,
Right, because she thought it was just a, good-natured ribbing, but this is a person who took that seriously.
Yeah.
And then it's like, how dare you? And this is like, now Ellen's gone the opposite of Sean Evans, where she has been like, I don't need to do any background, even on my own conversations with her. Whereas when you look at, like, say, Conan O'Brien, almost every time that he has a repeat guest, he'll say, like, okay, last time you talked about this. How's that going?
Right.
Or this was, something that happened a year ago when we met. What's going on there?
所以我真的觉得大家要在做任何的 conversation 的时候，还是要想一想上次可能说了什么话。Do a little bit of research because 我们的听众大家一定都是大忙人，你应该每一天都有非常多的会议，你认识的人很多。It's easy to forget a lot of conversation, to be very honest. But do a little research, dig a little bit, and try to go back to some emails, maybe. 我觉得有时候看一下你们的 email chain, 你就 do a quick search, 这个人的名字打一下，然后就会看到之前我们的 email 上面讲什么啊。挑一个东西，你们有一个 common ground, 我觉得从这个地方你可以延续这一次的 conversation.Yeah,
and I think this is especially important recently with the pandemic situation. Like, we've even had examples where pre-pandemic, we had a conversation, maybe we were building up to business, but of course, everyone got thrown off, both by the global and then Taiwan's, and maybe a year since the last time we talked about them. But they still reach out. But if I started a reply email, be like, oh, well, what do you guys need? I mean, we've had conversations. I just had to read a few emails and go, oh, okay, is this still the situation? Is this still what you're trying to do? And clarify, it actually shows that I did the research.
Yeah, so 我觉得今天就算我们现在没有要访问人家，我们不是做节目的人 that's okay, 但是从今天的这个 example 我们就可以了解到，当你要跟人家做 conversation 的时候 you know, be patient. 当你有任何的翻译的情况当中 be very patient, give it time, give it space. 不要特别的去挖人家的一些新闻，然后挖人家的一些不想说的东西。还有呢 try to do your research, do your homework before the conversation.We
hope that this helps you become a better conversationalist or conference call host, and we'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.